Perfect. So today what we're going to talk about is how you go about scoping your MVP. So let's dive right in. Perfect. So when you're thinking through your MVP, there's a natural inclination to want to just add everything to it, to add every feature, function, value. Again, it's founders get inclined to build the full product when we're only at, first stage of product. And I understand the inclination because the goal is I want to provide all this value and there's so many problems to solve and all this stuff. And it's fine for that to be the truth, but it's not like the whole truth, meaning there are probably some problems that can be focused on. There are probably some problems within whatever you're trying to solve that are easier to build a solution for, that are cheaper to build a solution for. Maybe one you can actually facilitate on your end versus another part of the offering that you want to create. You have to have some big fancy AI developer. In this, we really want to come to an understanding of what problem are we really trying to solve with the MVP? Because if we can't specify the problem, we don't know if the MVP scope is complete. And the scope is complete when the problem is solved. And again, it depends on what your goal is for your MVP. The main options, the reasons that people are building an MVP, one, to of course, validate and test the product, maybe get some revenue. Again, if you have some funding behind you or the MVP isn't too expensive to build. More often than not, what people are doing is they're trying to build the MVP so that way they can go raise money. Well, if you're going to build an MVP and you need to show that A, it exists and B, it works, keeping it a really tight focus that you can get done quickly and make sure it works really, really well. Again, even if it only does one thing, it should do that one thing really well. That's a much higher likelihood of raising money than just going in with look, we have 20 incomplete features that help solve 3 vague problems. No investor wants to be a part of that. And it's also so much more inefficient when it comes to progressing the business, generating revenue, getting momentum around the brand. There's every reason under the sun to be specific and almost no reasons not to be. Unless you've got time, energy, and money to waste, which I'm going to assume you don't, be specific. Specify the problem. What specific problem are we solving? And again, this is just a very simple, okay, if our goal is, again, let's just keep it easy, one of my companies that I work with, so it makes it very tangible for me. If the issue is people are struggling to get lawyers for their cases, then no matter what we do, no matter what we build, no matter how fancy our website looks or how detailed our product looks or UI UX, if an individual can't efficiently connect with a high quality lawyer, the MVP didn't work. The MVP failed. And by specifying, we give ourselves criteria for failure. And that's okay. We're failing internally. Way better to fail internally than externally. But at least we're doing it here. Next is, do you understand how the competitors and customers are solving it currently? This can give a lot of direction and a lot of focus to what you actually need to build in order to satisfy a customer need. As an example, if a customer's main need is one specific feature that the competitors don't have, well, that tells you basically the one thing that you absolutely need to have included, or else what's the point, right? How are they going to get involved and get invested in your business if there's no compelling differentiator between you and the competitors? Likewise, it can be a very common scenario that founders think, oh, I want to solve the problem this way, but then you go do market research and the market research informs you that, hey, the market actually prefers it solved this way, or customers seem to be buying that way. It's good to have your own inclination and, think it through before you let the market kind of poison you, because maybe you've got some innovation under your sleeve. But I find that often you're innovating in context of what's currently going on in the market. You're not just innovating with, you're not reinventing the wheel, and you're not coming up with the wheel the first time. It's a little different. Specify the must-have features. The reason this is number 2 is because it directly connects to number 1, right? What are the must-haves versus nice-to-haves across the product? Now, the nice thing is must-haves are very clear. If we don't have this, either the product or the customer relationship doesn't work. As an example, if we're building a SaaS and we don't have a login screen for our customer, it's over, right? We failed. That's a must have. If we do not have it, they literally can't use it. And you think this sounds small and silly and pedantic, No, you're a founder. You're going to be thinking through literally every word of text, every button, every side screen, everything you can think of will come into play. And guess what? The login screen is absolutely one of those things. So notice that's a very critical kind of must-have feature. Now, to that end, big fancy animated graphics and visual representations of the product, that is a nice to have, right? Because you could get the same messaging if you're a good salesperson via a Figma designer that you pay a couple $100s to, via a flow chart, via a sales presentation. It doesn't matter how you do it. It just matters that you're doing it in an efficient way. And if it's not something that you have to have, then you do it cheaply, you do it on the side, but you don't let it distract from what you need to build, the must-haves. In this example, are we connecting people with the right lawyers? Is there a login screen? Is there a way for them to check on the responses from the lawyers? Like, notice these are critical things that if we connect them with a lawyer, but there's no way for them to engage or there's no confirmation, well, then the MVP doesn't work because you could have 1,000 people that are connected that don't know. That's a failure, right? The reason I throw the across the product in is because here's the realism. I'm not saying you can go out there and build the ugliest, nastiest website, that comes to mind and just expect someone to just, work their way through it and your product is so amazing, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, I'm expecting us to meet the minimum criteria that our audience sets to convert. It's up to them. Right? So the example I would use is, let's say you build all your features and functions, but the UI UX or the integrations or the general theming of it in some capacity makes it incompatible with the audience. The audience doesn't want to use. As like an extreme example, what if there was a really hard to use front end and a really easy to use, really well designed front end? And let's imagine that you're selling to people that all of their software has really nice, easy to use front ends. Now, mind you, if the pain is severe enough, they might eat the really nasty front end because guess what? That's what's for lunch, right? That's what is going to satisfy them and what they need to move forward. However, if they actually need something that's functional, if they actually need something that meets the standard that they've set for their business, a good example of this is enterprise clients. You can't go to enterprise clients with, the ugliest things in the world. It actually has to fit the standard of that particular business, of that industry, etc. Focus on one feature and value prop. And the reason I throw value prop in there versus just feature, because sometimes the value prop requires 2, 3, 4, 5 features, and that's okay. But notice I'm coming to the conclusion that I need the features based off my conviction, and ideally you've collected data, that this is the way that we need to provide value. In order to provide value to solve this problem, we need to give these 3 features, these 5 functions, whatever, but then we do it. Then it's solved. And there's 100 other things we can do, I'm sure, but this solves that first wave where we can prove that the business, that the product is valuable. Next, define key performance indicators. There's no other way to say it. Quantifiable is always going to be best, right? Now, there's really 2 big ways that I try to look at this. One is just the general, let's call it customer satisfaction side, right? You may have heard of NPS or Net Promoter Score, a way to see if your business or if your product is really fitting well and solving the problem and, in high demand with your individual customer. That's a great thing. Definitely do it. I'll probably make a video on it at some point, but that is a great quantifiable metric for customer satisfaction. The other side of it are really broken down into a couple different places. I tend to think about them in terms of go-to-market. So anything sales, marketing, biz dev related. How many leads am I generating? How many clicks are my posts getting? How is my conversion rate with my sales calls, right? That's one side. Second is product, which is if I was to break those 5 features and say, how many times are people interacting with those features? Which of the features generates the highest interest, the most clicks? Maybe the one that gets the least clicks is the highest ROI. Isn't that interesting? Well, you can't know that if you, of course, don't have some KPIs set up. And then the last are financials. And financials, of course, crosses into sales because you're selling 1,000 units for $20, therefore, $20,000 in revenue, whatever. But at the end of the day, we're trying to look at, again, dollars and margins and growth and different metrics that are relevant to your business, whether it's churn, whether it's inventory cost, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other side, we're trying to really understand, how is our conversion process? Acquisition, retention, activation. How are we getting them? How are we keeping them? How are we turning them into people that are champions of our business, that are evangelists, as much as, the average customer can be? The way that I tend to think about the KPIs, both internally, how we're assessing it, but also externally when I'm looking at it for the customer, is what value are we capturing? And 90% of businesses I have found fall into this bucket, which is 1, more revenue. So, hey, use our software, you make more money. 2, less expense, which is, hey, use our software and you save tons of money. 3 is a better experience. Hey, you're having an okay day, get on this roller coaster, it's amazing. Or, hey, your leg is broken, here's some morphine, now you're not so sad. Notice both of these are taking a situation from where it is and vastly improving it. People, of course, will pay for that. And the last is reduced risk. As an example, nobody likes to get arrested or get a ticket if you're driving around without insurance in your car. Therefore, you have insurance. You're reducing your risk. Nobody likes it when your house burns down or floods and the insurance company, again, they can screw you over, but in theory, let's assume they're paying you out. Well, if you have the insurance, guess what? You have de-risked. Nobody buys insurance, again, for the average person to make money. They buy it to protect their assets, protect their money. Notice, if you had to pick, and you see this all the time, the example I always use, which is quite silly, is there are people that you probably know or have seen videos of online that go to amusement parks and go to parties and go on vacation, and they don't have insurance. They don't even have the most basic of insurance. They're risking their life, literally, and they're doing the craziest stuff, and they don't care. You want to know why? Because having a better experience is often way more fun to purchase than reducing risk. Likewise, if I'm selling to a business, hey, you want to double your revenue? That's way more exciting than, hey, you want to save 20% on cost? It's like both are valuable, but if you're at a growth stage business, if your client is looking to get big, you probably want to sell them more revenue. If you're at a late stage business where your client's trying to optimize, you probably want to sell them more revenue still, but you want to sell them more on the expense savings because that's where they're trying to optimize. Get feedback from leads and informed partners. So feedback is a really helpful tool. It's very much a Trojan horse, but the nice thing is it can be a very authentic Trojan horse, meaning it doesn't have to be, which is I often go into getting feedback actually looking for feedback. Because for me, I know even if the first 5 customers love whatever it is that I'm selling, I need to get the next 10,000 customers to love it in order to really make a dent. So to that degree, if the first 5, if all they do is give me helpful information, I am incredibly satisfied with that, because then I can use it on customers, 6 through 6,000. The nice thing is, though, because you're actually going with an authentic frame, right? Like mentally, physically, etc., of, hey, I want feedback and I'd love to get your thoughts and tell me what you love, tell me what you hate, right? I have calls all the time where I get on and for feedback, I go, this is going to be the negative call, which means you're not allowed to give me any compliments. You're only allowed to give me negatives, things you didn't like, things you found confusing, things you found frustrating. This is often very freeing for clients because they go, oh, well, if I can't say anything positive, I have to say a negative. It's not me being mean. It's just the rules of the game. It's like, exactly, because you're always going to learn more from the criticisms than people singing your praises and clapping that your product is so good. When in reality, maybe it's like a C+, maybe it's like a B-. And remember, $100 million companies are generally A companies. The nice thing is you engage in these discussions and they see how much you care. They see what you're building. They see how you're trying to fix stuff. And they go, hey, when this is ready, let me know. Yeah. Like you have like an email list or something. It's like, I have had that exact chat 1,000 times at this point, where someone expresses heavy interest because they see the attention to detail and the focus and the connection that you've built with them. And this happens at a random coffee shop, just having a chat, reviewing the product. The other thing I keep in mind is informed feedback only. Now, if you're talking to a potential customer, you don't know what's informed or uninformed. Obviously, you can be talking to the wrong role. You're selling to a sales manager and you're talking to a sales rep. Okay, clearly you need to talk to the right person to get the right info. But if we're talking broadly, because again, you're not building your startup in a vacuum, more than likely, meaning there's not just you and the customer, there's your team, there's the advisors, there's the mentors, there's the local co-working space, there's that pitch competition. It's very easy to get inundated with a lot of feedback that then colors what you think you need to build for your MVP. Because if you talk to all these leads and they express heavy interest in these 2, 3, 4, 5 features, and then you go work with them and improve them, that's amazing. In the same way, you can talk to these advisors and they can talk your ear off about 5, 10, 20 features. But if they're not the customer, or they're not especially informed in the industry, in the business model, what have you, hesitate, right? It's not that you shouldn't hear the feedback. It's that you shouldn't take it as Bible when it's coming from someone that doesn't know how to read, right? As an example, it's like you need people that are competent in the space. And part of that is for you to discover who's competent, what's not competent, etc. But if I had to pick where I'm going to put my faith in the customer or in the team or in like the general partner world or people that just generally have an opinion on the business, I'm always going to default to the customer. This is another reason why I'm always encouraging founders to talk to their customer as much as possible, because every conversation with a potential customer has the potential to be worth 100x any conversation with the team, because you could learn something, you could convert them, you could get a referral. There's so much that could happen. But if you're not talking to them, how do you expect that to happen? Last, price the project. I think this is last. Price the project. So when we price projects, we don't want to think just in terms of dollars. It's very tempting, of course, just to go, oh, well, I'm putting 50K in. And here's a little side note. When you're talking to investors, they don't care what the hourly is that you put in, meaning if you get paid $1,000 an hour and you put in 10 hours, nobody's going to value that at 10,000. It's just, that's not how it works, because you own the equity. So that all kind of gets bundled into there. So small note, side note, I wish it wasn't true. It absolutely is true, because, and if you have a question on that, here's the immediate thought. What if the guy that's $1,000 an hour is really inefficient? Like he's worth $1,000 an hour, but he's really slow. And somebody else is worth $750 an hour and they're really fast. Well, it's like, should the person who works faster or slower be penalized? And how do you negotiate that? And who's managing them? Notice investors, advisors, people, we don't want to talk about that. We don't care about that, because our suggestion, again, we mean it respectfully, is work more efficiently. Don't waste your time spending 30 hours on a marketing plan. Spend 2 hours and make an actual marketing post, right? These are things that are hard to do because they're challenging. They're not hard to do because they're complicated to understand, right? So when we think of pricing the project, again, side note aside, we want to think in terms of dollars that we're putting in. And internally, we want to think in terms of hours and effort. It doesn't mean we're going to go to the investor and value it. But the example is, if there's 3 features, let's just say they're all equal price for the sake of argument, but one of them is going to take way more effort and way more hours, and another one of them is going to take way less effort and way less hours. Well, if we think the ROI or the demand from the customer for these 3 features, as an example, is relatively even, or better yet, we don't know, maybe we should build the thing and test the thing that's easy to test and efficient to test and cheap to test, versus trying to build, A, the expensive one, or B, the worst, or, C, the worst case scenario, all 3 of them. This is an easy way where if you need all 3 features, that's the bundle, right? You have to buy all of them. But if you can afford to split, to slice, to dice, and to understand what is each feature, function, improvement, what's it going to cost me? Now, if you're resource abundant, you don't have to think as much of this. But if you're just a normal person living in the real world, having to manage finances, and I'm assuming you don't have hundreds of thousands invested or, financing this, you have to think about those 10, 20, 50 hours, because you're going to pay a developer $150 an hour for 100 hours. It changes. It's very material if that's 20 hours, 50 hours, 200 hours, and things add up quick. So I want to be sensitive and cautious around this. Next piece is you don't need a CTO, this is my opinion, to start most technology businesses. Now, obviously, if you're on the front end, the bleeding edge of innovation, yeah, you're probably going to need a CTO because that's probably the person that's leading, the science part, the development part, et cetera, et cetera. However, if you're just a person that spots a market inefficiency, you come up with Uber, you come up with Airbnb, you come up with this, that, whatever, that does not require a CTO. That requires a really good understanding of the features and functions that go into the product and a really competent development agency with someone that you trust, with someone that has experience in the space, with someone that has done this before. You do not want to be someone's experiment if you can avoid it. So, and often a lot of these development shops will offer these CTO services, even part-time, just because they know a lot of founders want to get stuff built. They often don't know all the questions to ask or all the things to think through. So these shops come in and for a couple $100 an hour or what have you, they can help you think through these things you may not be able to think through yourself. And sometimes this can form into long-term equity conversations and partnerships and whatnot. But very often it's just a work for service, a work for hire. You have to do your due diligence, but then you have a sense of, hey, this whole project is going to take 3 months, 50K. We've spoken to 3 different development shops. We're getting a range of 35 to 75. We think the one at 50K is the best. We can put in 30K. Now we need to go find this 20. Notice how we've started to build a plan. And notice I can go push on any of those and test them. Development shop, the budget, the customers, the features, the functions, the UI, the UX, the back end, the website. I can push and break any of those or try and make them more accurate, more refined. But what I'm trying to do is kind of get 75% of the puzzle built and then see what it looks like, see how I feel, see what needs to be tweaked. Because as an example, what if you spend a ton of time thinking through your features and then you wait to go talk to the development agency and the development agency actually comes back much cheaper than you thought? It's well, damn, then you just wasted 3 weeks thinking through a bunch of features that actually you could have afforded week 1 if you would have just talked to the development agency then. So notice it's hard to just do this as one sequence of step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is something where you're going to be starting and revisiting steps on a regular basis. It's more of a living ecosystem. This is just kind of the flow of the ecosystem. This is the way the river moves, if that makes sense. And that's what we got. So hopefully this gives you a better sense of how to scope in your MVP, how to think about what your customer needs, how to think about what you can afford, right? Literally and figuratively, and how you can go about progressing that to make sure that you're building something that people want. The worst thing for you to do is come up with a great idea. Again, just not execute properly in terms of scoping in your MVP. You spend all this time, all this money, all this energy, and you build something that nobody uses. And then you've lost years, months. I know people that have been in development for 18 months and it blows my fucking mind. But it's there are so many things that people need to do when you're building a business. And I want to make sure that this part, you give it a lot of TLC, but you don't go so above and beyond and you don't try and the blade doesn't need to be perfectly sharp for it to cut. It just needs to be sharp enough. So hopefully that helps.